welcome to BVC. We are really glad that you're here today. Our hope as a church is that every single person has the opportunity to experience the extravagant love of Jesus. And we get to participate in that as we join together as community. And so we're glad you're here today. It doesn't matter where you are on your journey, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you've come from, you are welcome here, and we are so glad that you are. We are going to spend some time today in worship, but before we get there, we always I realize that one of the tough balances in life are recognizing the weighing out the wonderful things in life with kind of the challenges and the hard things of life. But one of the ways we like to start sometimes is just taking a moment and turning our hearts towards gratitude as we enter worship together. So just quickly, why don't we take a moment and we'll do one of our good news moments together. What is going on in your life right now that is exciting, something that's good, whether that's been this summer, whether that's just a job or something like that. What does that look like for you? What are some good things we have going on in our community right now? Moving to school in 2 weeks. Yeah, that's going to be exciting for you. This is your first time living on res, right? Yes. Yeah, that's going to be awesome, Tal. I'm glad for you. What else do we have going on? What's good? Anything good going on? No? Yeah, Wes? Pool parties and having people over? Yeah. Blair? She's moving to school.
We did work for last year.
Amazing. Yeah. Love it. Any other good news? Pete?
With my brother,
Oh, that's awesome, man. When do you go? Friday. Okay. Awesome, man. Hope it's a wonderful time with you guys. Anybody else? Good news? Yeah, beautiful. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. He may not say it, but I'm going to say it because it's an answer to prayer. Mike got a new job this week, which is awesome. He's been waiting for one, so yeah, that's great. Anything else going on?
I have something.
Yeah.
We fell in love with that area of Nova Scotia, and you never know. I mean, I still have him to work on, but we all loved it so much that we didn't want to leave. Just saying. That's actually an answer to prayer, because we have been looking on the East Coast for a long time for like a place that we could see ourselves settling down at some point. And the three of us really, I feel like we found it, but
yeah.
Because we're going back there next year. We'll be neighbors with Sue and Jeff. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm really thankful for that.
Great. Anything else before we move on? All right. Let me just open in prayer. God, thank you so much for today. We thank you for just these brief stories of what's going on in the lives of the people in our community. We are just full of gratitude for what's going on. And God, as we come into this space and we, again, just kind of weigh out the good and the bad in our life, God, we recognize that you see it all, that you know each and every one of us. You know the hurts and the joys. And so, God, we just bring it all to you today, and we lay it at your feet, and we ask you to continue to heal us, move us towards wholeness as we come into worship, as we come to learn, as we come to encourage and be your hands and feet to one another in this space. Lord, we just ask all these things in your name. Amen. We have been on quite the journey with Moses and the Israelites over this summer. We've met the God who hears the cries of the oppressed. We've talked about the plagues. We talked about the waters parting. We talked about Pharaoh's armies chasing down the Israelites. We've heard the people complaining in the desert, and we've watched God give them bread every morning. And last week, we left Moses up on the mountain with God, receiving the commands that would shape Israel's life together going forward. But while Moses is up there, there's something going on with the Israelites back down in camp, which is the part of the story that we find ourselves at today. So before I say anything else, we're going to just read the first part of Exodus 32 together. Oh, it's coming down out there.
You know that.
Yeah. Oh, shoot, Blair. All right, Exodus 32, verse 1. When the people saw how long it was taking for Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Aaron answered, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters were wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." Okay, so up to this point, somehow after everything that they've seen and everything that God has done, we are now here with the Israelites making a god out of their earrings. Or at least that's what it looks like at first. And honestly, on the surface, it seems a little bit bizarre, right? Like if God did all of these things that we've talked about, if God rescued them from Egypt, if God split the Red Sea, if God continued to provide for them over and over and over again, how could they possibly be looking at an alternative simply because Moses has been gone a little bit longer than expected? And this translation, I think, is a little bit funny. You know, like, as for this fellow Moses, who knows what's happened to him? Like, he's like this, they've kind of distanced themselves from him. Like, who knows what's happened to him? I mean, this is only the guy that's confronted Pharaoh. He's part of the Red Sea. He's made bread fall from the sky. And these guys are like, "Meh, what have you done for me lately?" And I think this is one of the interesting things about the Hebrew story. There's this old saying, and oddly enough, I heard somebody use it this week. History is written by the victors. Anybody heard that before? Yeah, you've heard it before? Awesome. History is written by the victors, which may not always be true, but the powerful usually have some control over what's being recorded and repeated and remembered by people. Because cultures don't really like to relive their most embarrassing moments. And actually, this is part of one of the major disputes in attempting to date the Exodus story. The thing is, there really isn't any clear archaeological evidence for an Exodus on the scale that is described in the story. But we're also talking about events from a very long time ago involving people whose movements in the desert may not have left much behind. And so the lack of evidence isn't all that surprising. So when I say the lack of evidence, doesn't mean that it didn't happen that way. It's just that there may be reasons for it. Even the Bible makes the Exodus difficult to date, though. The passage names the city Ramesses, which is one reason some people place a story sometime around 1250 BCE. But then 1 Kings says Solomon began building the temple 480 years after the Exodus, which points closer to 1450 BC. And so I'm not going to get into a lot of numbers, but this is when, like, this timeline there gives us a completely different dynasty within Egypt. And here's something to consider. 480 is 12 times 40, quick math, and both of those numbers carry significance in the biblical story. And so some scholars actually think this isn't really meant to give us an exact date. It may be more of a symbolic way about talking about the 12 generations. And so we don't know that for sure, but people in the Bible didn't always use numbers quite in the same way that we do. And so just something to think about, something to consider. Either way, we don't have a known Egyptian account for a large group of enslaved people leaving Egypt in the way that Exodus describes. Now, maybe the story did begin with a smaller group. Maybe no record survived, or maybe it was exactly the kind of story Egypt had no interest in preserving. We really don't know. Because if you read the official Egyptian accounts, somehow the Pharaoh always comes out looking pretty good, right? Pharaoh didn't lose. That doesn't mean Egypt never lost, though. It just means that they weren't especially interested in writing down the stories that made them look bad. These accounts were meant to remind everyone how powerful and important the Pharaoh was. This is kind of the nature of the way history has been recorded in a lot of cases. And the thing is, that goes for Egypt, it goes for Babylon, it goes for Greece and Rome and for America, and it goes for Canada too. We've recently come through Indigenous History Month in the month of June, and in another month or so, we're going to mark the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And we are still confronting parts of our history that settler institutions minimized or concealed or just simply refused to hear. And many of those stories were never forgotten by Indigenous communities, but they were excluded from the version of history that the rest of Canada preferred to tell. How many of us have been learning more about the Indigenous history of Canada and are like, I never heard anything about that in school? Yeah. History is written to the benefit of the powerful. And the thing is, we do this on our own, like within our own stories too. Most of us have that one embarrassing story from our childhood that keeps getting brought up, and it gets so twisted over the years that we're actually the only ones that remember what actually happened in that moment, right? And if you were the one deciding which stories got told, that one probably would have disappeared a long time ago. We tend to repeat stories that reinforce the narratives that we want, and we slowly let the ones that embarrass us fall away. It's kind of our default, and we all do it. And that's one of the interesting things about Israel's scriptures. They actually keep all of these stories, the ones that most people would probably want to forget. David, like the greatest king in Israel's history, is an absolute disaster. Solomon, who's supposed to usher in this time of peace and justice, used forced labor to build the temple. Even Moses, Israel's greatest prophet, never enters the promised land. The Bible is full of stories that you would expect to be left out. Not because failure is the whole story of who they are, but because forgetting their failures would make it a whole lot easier for them to repeat them. We get stories of Moses doubting himself because we can recognize we get stories of Moses doubting himself because we can recognize ourselves in them. We get stories of people grumbling about what there is to eat because we can recognize ourselves in them. We get this story of people becoming impatient and frightened and convinced that they need to take matters into their own hands because if we're honest, we can recognize ourselves in this story. And the point isn't just to remember what happened. It's to be honest about why it happened and to recognize how easily we can end up doing the same thing. Like Israel didn't keep this story around so that every generation could shake its head and say, wow, like what a bunch of dummies. These people were ridiculous. They kept it because every generation is capable of doing the same thing. I mean, we may not melt down golden earrings and try to make a golden calf, but there may be more of us in this story than we first notice. And that, I think, is where the old story begins to speak directly to us. So let's go back a little bit and look a little more closely at what actually happens. So Moses, as we talked about last week, he goes up on the mountain and he gets the 10 words. But he's gone a little bit too long and the people get antsy. And so they gather around Aaron, who's sort of been second in command by Moses through this whole story, and they demand that he does something. Now, before we judge Aaron too quickly here, I wonder how well any of us do when God is taking too long. What do we reach for when we don't know what God is doing? What do we try to control when waiting starts to feel unbearable? Because that's really where the calf begins. Not with gold, but with fear, with uncertainty, and the need to just do something, to take control. to take that next step forward. Now, just as a note, when it says they gather around him, it more literally should be something like they assemble over Aaron. That phrase gets used a few times in the Hebrew scriptures, and every time it's around some sort of confrontation. And so it's not a conversation. They're not coming to him for guidance here, saying, Aaron, what should we do? What do you think? They're not coming with a suggestion and hoping that he gives them an answer. It's more like they're coming to him and cornering him. They're like threatening him, like, do this our way. We're going to do this our way, and you better get on board. And to me, like, that makes a little bit more sense when I read this story. Like, I have a hard time imagining Aaron, who's been alongside of Moses through all of these miracles, just saying, yeah, sure, great idea, guys. Like, let's just forget everything that Moses has taught us, what he's told us, the example that he's given us. I mean, he's probably dead anyways. Let's make a big golden calf. That's a great idea. And still, though, sometimes a part of leading is saying no, right? Most of us probably know what it's like to go along with something that we knew wasn't right. Not because we believed in it exactly, but because saying no felt like the harder thing. Or maybe because we felt pressured to have a better alternative, but we didn't, and so we kind of just went along with what was being suggested. You know, maybe it was at work, a situation at school. Maybe it was in a friendship or in our family. Maybe we just stayed quiet because we didn't want to be the difficult person in the room. And so Aaron's misstep here isn't exactly unusual. I think it's very relatable, actually, for a lot of us. He gives people what they want because standing against them is going to cost them something. And so he tells everyone to bring their gold. He takes all of it and he melts it down and he pours it into a mold that's that they make. And then he uses a tool to kind of do a little bit of detail work to make it look like a calf. And the text is pretty specific about this whole process, because when Moses comes down off the mountain and confronts Aaron, Aaron is like, look, man, like, they gave me this gold. I just put it in the fire and it came out looking like this. What do you want me to do about it? It sounds like the kind of excuse you get from a kid, like, who's caught red-handed. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. It's right up there with, like, my dog ate my homework. It's got to be one of the worst excuses of all time. But I think we can probably all relate to what it looks like to pass the buck, right? Good on Aaron for even trying this one out, but this is life, right? Like, we try to justify and try to minimize the role that we play in a situation. We shift it onto someone else or something else to save face. And the problem is, what you can see here is that this kind of stuff is almost always completely obvious to everyone that's not telling the story, right? Like, I have no doubt Aaron's hearing this story come out of his mouth and thinking, oh yeah, Moses is definitely going to buy this. I've got him. And Moses is like, why can't he just tell the truth so we can move on and get past it, right? We all know what that's like. Whether you were the kid hearing it from a parent or a parent saying it to a kid, if you just tell the truth, it'll be so much easier. We'll move on. It's no secret that when the more open we are and the quicker we recognize and take responsibility for our mistakes, the quicker we can get back to what we're doing. Because we're going to have to make things right sooner or later. And putting it off only makes the whole thing take longer. Now, some of you may have never read this chapter before. Maybe you know about the golden calf and Aaron's terrible excuse, but maybe not everything that happens around it. And if that's you, I would encourage you to go back and read the whole chapter. And when you get to the difficult parts, there are some difficult parts in this chapter. Don't feel as though you have to just explain them away and come up with an answer and a reason for every single thing that happens. Others of us may have read this story many times. We're very familiar with it without really stopping over these parts. Maybe we were taught to read it fairly simply. People sinned, God judged them, and that was that. But I wonder if sometimes we just like move too quickly over these passages, because this passage, this chapter is not simple. Before Moses even comes down from the mountain, God sees what the people are doing, and he tells Moses to leave him alone so that his anger can burn against them. And I don't think we can rush past that, and I don't think we can pretend that it's easy and can be explained in a really like basic way to our 4-year-old children. This is a picture of God that can make us uncomfortable, especially for those of us who believe that Jesus shows us most clearly what God is like. But notice what happens next. God brings Moses into the conversation. And Moses doesn't leave God alone. He reminds God of the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And he asks God to remain faithful to those promises. I mean, Moses could simply have just stepped aside and let God do his thing and start over with just him. But he doesn't. He stands up to the same people who have caused this entire mess, who he has been struggling with all along, being like, guys, remember God's faithfulness, remember. And maybe Moses isn't talking an angry God into becoming merciful. Maybe he's reminding God of the mercy and faithfulness that have already been part of the story. And maybe part of the reason God brings Moses into the conversation is that Moses is supposed to step in to become the kind of leader who won't save himself by giving up on everybody else. By the end of the conversation, God doesn't do what God has threatened to do here. What the people have done still matters, and there are consequences, but destruction doesn't get to be the end of the story. And then when Moses comes down from the mountain, things get darker. He destroys the calf, he confronts Aaron. The Levites move through the camp with swords. About 3,000 people are killed, and later the people are struck by a plague. And I don't want us to just like breeze past and pretend those aren't a part of the story, or that I know exactly what to do with them. They raise hard questions about violence, about judgment, and the ways that people have understood God. These questions deserve more time than we can give them today. But in the middle of all of this, Moses is pleading for his people. He won't write them off, and he simply won't stand aside and let them be destroyed. His heart is for them. And as Christians, it's hard not to read that and think about Jesus. Jesus standing with people in their failure, pleading for mercy. He refuses to answer violence with more violence, and rather than walking away from the people he came to save, he gives himself for them. Like I said, I don't have a neat answer that makes every violent part of this chapter easy. But if we believe that Jesus most clearly shows us who God is, then we have to let Jesus shape the way that we read a story like this. And so when I read this story, I pay close attention to the moment when someone steps in, refuses destruction, and asks for mercy. And with all of that in the background, I want to come back to the question, which is kind of at the heart of the calf itself. What exactly has gone wrong here? It would be really easy to reduce this lesson to something obvious, like the golden calves are bad, so don't make one. Like we could just go home with that today. But I think that would really let us keep the story safe and in the past. The more difficult question is whether the people are just simply abandoning God. Is that actually what's happening here? Or are they trying to reshape the God who has saved them into the kind of God that they wanted? And if that is what's happening here, then this story is not nearly as distant from us as we might think it is. So let's go back to what we read earlier. These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. And in English, this gets translated as, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. But the Hebrew, from what I've learned, is a little strange. It uses plural language, these and gods, even though Aaron has made only one calf. It doesn't fit together as neatly as our English translation sometimes makes it sound. So then look at what Aaron says next. He builds an altar in front of the calf and announces, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. And whenever we see Lord in in all capitals, that is pointing us towards the word Yahweh, which is the name of the God who met Moses and brought Israel out of Egypt. And so whatever else is happening here, Aaron is connecting the calf with the worship of Yahweh. This may not be as simple as Israel abandoning one God for another. And if that's what's happening, then the people may not necessarily be breaking the first commandment like we often think they are when we read this. You shall have no other gods before me. It may actually be the second command against making an image of God. They haven't necessarily chosen a different God. They have taken the God who saved them and given that God a shape that they can see, that they can manage, that they can carry around with them. They are trying to keep God on their terms. And that is the real danger, I think, in this story. Not just worshiping something with the wrong name, but taking the right God and turning that God into the kind of God that we want. And the shape they gave that God tells us something about the kind of God that they wanted. You see, in the ancient Near East, the image of a calf would actually have been understood as a young bull. So not some cute little calf that maybe we would think of. The young bulls were associated with all kinds of different gods. Why? Well, what did people want from those gods? They wanted someone to look after them, especially when it came to things that were completely out of their control. And in the ancient world, that often meant things like the weather, things like harvest, their livestock, and the future of their families. Next generations. The young bull wasn't some random animal that they landed on. In the ancient world, it was a perfect, powerful symbol of strength, of fertility, and of life. A strong bull meant healthy herds. It meant more offspring and greater abundance. Bulls were also associated with storm gods because rain made the land fruitful and allowed crops and animals and families to flourish. And so even though the bull didn't literally bring the rain, it represented the kind of divine power that people believed could bring rain and make life prosper. And that made this bull the image of God that these people wanted on their side. Flourishing, a full life. In other words, Israel isn't necessarily trying to get rid of Yahweh. They like what this God has done for them. They just wanted to keep this God on their terms. And all of a sudden, this sort of weird old story about golden calves and superstitions start to sound a little bit more relevant to us. Because religion isn't just about choosing the right God, it's about the way that we imagine that God functions in our world. And this God who frees slaves, this God is not your fertility God. This God is not your prosperity God or your war God or your political God or your sports God or even your personal God. This is the God who intervenes on behalf of the slave, who proclaims good news to the poor and freedom for the prisoner and sight for the blind, who sets the oppressed free. To quote Isaiah by way of Jesus, and yet as soon as the Israelites are free from those who oppress them, they begin trying to reimagine God as the kind of God who will give them security and prosperity and power on their terms. And this God says, no, that's not the game we're playing here. You don't worship me to gain control over a situation. You don't worship me so that I'll give you power over another human being. And so here's where that story connects for us. You and I can absolutely worship the right God in the wrong way. And that means we can call ourselves Christians, we can believe the right things about Jesus, hold a festival to God, say all the right words and go through all the right motions and still find ourselves moving away from God. And if we are honest, their temptation really isn't that much different from ours. We may not make a golden calf, but we can still want a God who will stay close to our plans, bless the life that we've imagined for ourselves, and make things turn out the way that we hope they would. So I'm curious if we can talk about this for a few minutes at our tables. Take a few minutes to maybe go over these questions together. When are we most tempted to want God to make life work out the way we planned? And how can we tell when we are following God and when we are just simply asking God to follow us? Let's take a few minutes and talk. All right. Thanks for those conversations. I let it go on a little longer, so we're just going to keep it at that today. I hope it was fruitful for you. So this is the question that's kind of underneath this whole story for me. Are we willing to follow God as God is? And as we were talking about at our table, God is who God is, but like we are constantly having our eyes open to more of that. So like we can only know what we know in this moment about who God is. And so that's going to be full of a life of mistakes and asking God for mercy and continuing. And we're just so thankful for God's Spirit, for his guidance, for his leading, and for God, the mercy and grace of Jesus as we navigate our way through this life, continually looking to God for guidance. What's interesting in all of this is how much easier it is to recognize someone else's golden calf than my own. It's easy for me to see how someone else has politicized God or weaponized Jesus or made faith serve their own interests. It's a lot harder to ask what God wants from me, or what kind of God I want, Do I want a God who mostly agrees with me? A God who protects what I already have, a God who is deeply concerned about the sins I find offensive, but strangely quiet about my own. A God who blesses the people I like and keeps everyone else at a safe distance. Because the God who always agrees with me may have more in common with me than Jesus. And that's why this matters. A God made in my image will never challenge me to move beyond my own fears and my own desires and my own boundaries that I've put in place. But the God of Exodus is always turning our attention toward the people that we would rather overlook. To create welcome for the foreigner, to care for the fatherless and the widow, love for our neighbor who may not look, think, or live like the person sitting next to you in this room. God isn't interested in worship that changes nothing about the way we live. If we worship the God who sets people free, then that has to show up somewhere in the way that we pursue justice and peace and show mercy and share what we have and the way that we love our neighbors. Because worship of the God who heard the cries coming out of Egypt should teach us to hear those cries too. It should move us away from the golden calves that serves our own fears and our own desires toward people God has been moving towards all along. And so this week, as we close up today, I want to encourage you to pay attention to where your picture of God is taking you. When you feel yourself drawing a boundary, or if you recognize a boundary that you've put in place, protecting your comfort or keeping someone at a distance, ask yourself whether that boundary looks anything like Jesus and what it might look like to move a little closer. Let's pray together. God, it is so easy for us to shape you into the kind of God we want. A God who agrees with us, who protects what we already have and helps life turn out the way that we have planned. And so we confess pride, we confess selfishness, we confess complacency, we confess living such a fast-paced life that we never slow down to actually pay attention to your leading. Forgive us for the ways that we try to keep you on our terms. Forgive us when we say the right words and go through all the right motions, but resist allowing you to change the way that we live. Help us to follow you instead of always asking you to follow us. Teach us to hear the cries that you hear. Turn our attention towards the people we would rather overlook. Help us to pursue justice and make peace and show mercy and share what we have and love our neighbors well. And this week, when we have the opportunity to protect ourselves or move towards someone in mercy, give us the courage to move in your direction. To prioritize the healing and the wholeness and the flourishing of our neighbor. Keep shaping us into people who look more like Jesus, people who others can experience your freedom, your mercy, and love through, Lord. Continue to change this, Lord. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Amen. Thank you for this time together today, guys. I appreciate it's such a blessing, honestly, like when we take a break after worship, just to look around and see the conversations that are happening and to hear the buzz. It's beautiful, and I'm so thankful for it. And thank you for engaging this passage like this today. I hope I made it clear that I'm not saying this is exactly the way it's going, but I also think it's important for us to look at what other scholars are saying from the way that many of us have grown to learn and understand certain passages. And so I hope that challenged our thinking a little bit, maybe presented a different lens for us to look at this through, and pray that it's something that is helpful for you today. So we love you guys. We're looking forward to Blair's going to be closing out this series next week for us as we look at covenant as we wrap up this series. So thank you for that, and hope you can join us as we kind of wrap up the summer leading into our long weekend, the weekend after that. And please keep an eye out for an email just to give so that you can get the details with where and when and what to bring on September the 6th. All right. Blessings, guys. Thank you in advance for your help tidying up today, and hope you can spend some more time together.